On May 2nd, 1963, thousands of students walked out of their schools and marched on the streets of Birmingham, Alabama, forming a united, youth-led movement against segregation in the South. Despite being met with dogs, fire hoses, and arrests, these young activists remained committed to their work, marching every day from May 2nd until May 10th. This historic moment, which will later be known as the Children's Crusades, stands as a strong and poignant reminder of the role that young people have been playing in movements for change, since change was necessary. As societal issues develop, the methods that generations have used to communicate their beliefs and engage in the fights have developed as well. While young people have always maintained some role in the political process, the onset of Generation Z has brought on a new era of young people directly leading entire efforts dedicated to the introduction, passing, and dismissing of legislation. Adolescents throughout the entirety of history have been one of the most marginalized and subjugated populations. Our court testimonies are easily undermined. Our role in the election process has been disregarded. And our seat at the table of legislative decision-making has been denied. Overall, the voices of our younger members of society have consistently been silenced to the greatest extent. In my 6 years of activism, I have watched as varying forms of age-based discrimination take root within young people, reinforcing the idea that we have no place in politics. When I was 10, I led my very first march against child abuse. And while the event was successful, some of my community members were quick to use social media as a means of reminding me my supposed place in society. They sent loud and clear messages that day that it was time for me to sit down and be quiet. The words that I said that day and the call to action that I gave my community, it was all taken lightly. Not because what I was saying was false, but because of who I was when I said them. When I was 12, I led an effort to raise $3,000 to establish pediatric safe rooms in a local hospital. A year later, I would lead a similar effort, but this time raising over $12,000 and in a different city. Despite having the support of hospital officials and healthcare providers and trauma-informed care specialists themselves, many were still quick to question why I thought I was the right one for this job. They didn't care that I completed my fundraising goals in half the time projected. They didn't care that these rooms were created with the insights of children and teens of varying age groups. And they most certainly didn't care that these rooms were leading examples of trauma-informed care and practice. But how could they? For they were far too concerned with how my age made me underqualified to act. I would not lead my very first bill effort until I was 14. And it is in the work of lobbying for legislation that I saw ageism in its very rawest of forms. The first time that I lobbied alone, I was denied time by elected officials, laughed at by other lobbyists, and asked to get coffee more times than to share what I was there to advocate for. This entire experience left me feeling disappointed, defeated, and quite frankly, ashamed, as I was forced to realize that it was my age and my age alone that stood in between me and making a difference. But instead of internalizing these feelings, shrinking down my dreams and getting in line, I was emboldened by them to ensure that the next time I returned to the General Assembly, no one could ignore me. In the following year, I would return, but this time with a team of over 40 youth lobbyists, all there to advocate for the very legislation that I had worked to introduce in the months prior. In working to address the injustices of my community, the focus of my activism has shifted to be centered around empowering my community by empowering its young people. Contributing to the collective strength of my generation has become not only the leading philosophy of my work, but this driving idea for the modern movement of change and progress led by my generation. Now, I am not alone in my efforts. Legislative advocacy has become an avenue for young people across the nation to use their voices. Similarly, we are no longer satisfied with simply advocating for legislation that we like or agree with, but this desire to be involved, and frankly, more importantly, a necessity for change as we grow up in a world plagued by hardships, has led and motivated members of my generation to form our own solutions to the problems affecting our communities. To work with legislators to turn these solutions into real pieces of legislation, and then to build teams of youth lobbyists to go and convey the need for this legislation. This multi-step process is happening at every stage of government as we realize what we can do when we all come together. In this, young people have also learned the urgency of now. Just as members of my generation and my peers have filled state capitals to stand in proud support of legislation, we have packed committee rooms to stand in bold opposition, sharing our perspectives as to how these bills will have drastic effects on our future, perspectives that have long been ignored. In other words, we have began to use legislative advocacy as a means of directly preventing the creation of new problems in our communities. The work of young people today is revolutionary in its very existence, as we have found a way to permeate the spaces for which we were purposefully excluded from. The writers of the United States Constitution, or any other fundamental law for that matter, had no intention our voices were included in the conversation. Yet this has not stopped millions of members of my generation from using their voices in some of the most beautiful displays of bravery, perseverance, and love. Today, we do not know what young people are fully capable of, because it is clear that we are just getting started. However, this is why we need the support of our communities everywhere. Great work has been done, despite great opposition. So I ask you to imagine, how much more could we do when we fight this opposition together? Despite not having the right to vote, young people have held strong in both our ability and our obligation to be involved in politics, but we simply cannot do it alone. Every single member of the community is called to be directly involved in the lives of its young people, amplifying our voices, empowering our senses of self, and contributing to making this world a better place. It is no secret that there is work to be done. However, if history has been any indicator, my generation has the power to do it. Thank you.